Before we dive into today's topic, I know you like to look at data and see what that's telling us before we start providing coaching on ministry strategies. And we've said this many times, better data helps us make better ministry strategy decisions. So, what I'm sure you know, what is the current data telling us related to volunteer engagement?
So, in preparation for this series, I dug into our most recent data to see what we could learn about serving in ministries of all different shapes and sizes. And at the time that I was doing this analysis, we had collected data from close to 300 churches. Here's what I did: I compared the top 25% of churches for volunteer engagement to the churches that were in the bottom 25%. I'm not going to name names, but that was the comparison because I wanted to learn how the churches that are winning when it comes to engaging people in serving roles are different from the churches that are struggling in this area. And here are some of the most interesting findings. The churches with higher volunteer engagement are reaching 4 times more new people. And I can't tell you based on the data whether or not new people are more likely to serve, but that's certainly what my gut tells me. And we're going to circle back to that key thought in coming weeks. Secondly, churches with more volunteers are also reaching more people for Jesus. Those churches that have high volunteer engagement also are seeing 40% more decisions to follow Jesus. And again, I don't know if there's something about encouraging people to serve that helps them take steps towards Christ, but there's obviously something about churches that prioritize serving that's it's leading to life change. There's just no other way to describe it. Here's another one: churches with low volunteer engagement have bigger boards, quite a bit bigger, and almost twice as many committees. And so the data clearly indicates that more people in meetings means fewer people are serving. And by the way, we've talked about this dynamic before as it relates to just growth and decline in churches. Declining churches also have bigger boards and twice as many committees. Here's another one: churches with low volunteer engagement have more people in attendance, but churches with higher volunteer engagement are experiencing higher attendance growth. And that again doesn't surprise me. I've done some previous research that indicates people who serve are also more likely to invite others to church. And if that's true, it explains why churches with higher volunteer engagement are experiencing faster growth in this season. Uh, One more: churches with high volunteer engagement also have 3 times as many volunteer leaders. So their span of care in these churches is smaller. But finally, this was just interesting: churches with high volunteer engagement are more likely to offer online services than the churches that are struggling with volunteer engagement. That one caught me by surprise. But in fact, 100% of the churches in that top 25% for volunteer engagement are offering online options for watching their services. So if there was something in the back of your mind that you were wondering, should we stop showing our services online to encourage more people to come to the church and to start serving, the data would actually indicate otherwise. And again, that's just another example, Amy, of how good data helps us make better ministry decisions. I mean, like I said, we'll circle back to several of these findings in the coming weeks, but this will hopefully help to tease some of the distinctives we're seeing in the churches that are winning when it comes to volunteer engagement.
Tony, one of the things you mentioned was something about the correlation between unity and volunteer engagement. Why don't we start there? Will you unpack that for us?
Yeah, so here's what I've observed through the years when it comes to this dynamic in churches. And I'll be curious to know, for those that are listening, if they've experienced this as well. What I've observed is that people who serve other people tend to complain a lot less. And it's probably, yeah. So it's obvious, but it's true, isn't it? It's probably because they're more interested in helping other people. They're probably also more invested in the mission of the church. Whatever the case, if you're frustrated by the volume of the complainers in your church, you probably need to encourage them to serve other people. If they're unwilling to do that, honestly, you probably need to encourage them to leave. Just don't send them to my church because people who are constantly complaining, they are certainly creating division in the church. And Paul's instruction on this was very clear. If people are causing divisions among you, first, give them a first and second warning, and after that, have nothing more to do with them. For people like that have turned away from the truth, and their own sins condemn them. I mean, that's pretty harsh. Because of this, we really do need to encourage people to serve other people rather than complaining about other people.
You also mentioned a connection between volunteer engagement and generosity. What are your thoughts related to that connection?
Yeah, and this is not going to be a surprise to you, Amy, or probably anyone listening, but people who serve also give more financially. And I've done this research several times in the past. Church attenders, they tend to contribute financially at the lowest levels in our churches. Church members give a little bit more. People who connect into a small group or a Bible study tend to contribute more than people who have become members, but those members aren't engaged in a group or serving. And then people who volunteer contribute financially at the very highest levels in churches. But if your finances are tight, you may want to invite people to serve before you invite them to give. We're, of course, familiar with this principle as it relates to Jesus' teaching on money. He said, wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. And my guess is that principle also does apply to our time and our spiritual gifts. So wherever people are invested, our heart tends to follow. So people who give financially tend to become more generous with their finances. And I think that's the result of the heart change that has taken place. I have to think the same principle applies to our time and our talents. People who give their time by serving others tend to be more generous towards people with their time.
Tony, over the coming weeks, we're going to get much more practical about how to engage more volunteers. Before we wrap up today, though, I have a question for you. Do you think it's possible for a church to have too many volunteers?
Well, believe it or not, I do think that's possible. I mean, the same truth, by the way, holds for small groups. I think it's possible for a church to have too many people in groups as well. You actually don't want 100% volunteer engagement in your church, just like you don't want 100% group participation in your church. That's actually a sign that the church is declining because you're probably not reaching any new people. So the hope is that you'll always have a steady stream of new people who are spiritually curious. These are people still considering the claims of Christ. Yes, we want everyone to continue to take steps towards Christ, and that should include encouraging people to connect in groups and serving opportunities as soon as possible. However, if everyone is serving, that's an indication that your church has a big front door problem. When the volunteer engagement numbers are too high, I hope you celebrate the heart for people to use their gifts and engage the mission of the church. However, I also hope it raises a red flag that causes you to pause and ask the question: is our reach strategy effectively engaging people who are currently outside the church and outside the faith? And are we pointing those people towards Jesus? When volunteer engagement is too high, it's an indication that people are doing ministry, but the church really isn't accomplishing its mission.